Question number 1 is from Ian Gray.
To ask the First Minister what engagements he has planned for the rest of the day.
First Minister.
Well, later today I'll be making an announcement with one of the world's leading online companies, Amazon, who intend to create 950 new full-time jobs in Scotland at 2 locations in Dunfermline and Gourock. And I know that the whole Chamber will want to wish and welcome such a positive boost for the Scottish economy in this new year.
Great.
Presiding Officer, we always welcome new jobs in Scotland. In October, I announced Labour's policy on a single Scottish police force. I challenged the First Minister to join us. However, he set up subgroups of the Police Board and the Ministerial Advisory Committee, and now they have reported, so he has set up a consultation. The consultation is going to report to a commission. Is the First Minister incapable of taking a decision? Does he agree with me that Scotland should have a single police force, or does he not?
First Minister.
Well, as Kenny McCaskill set out yesterday, that change is inevitable. The status quo is not an option. He set out the position of the government on both the police and, of course, the fire service. We've been examining the arguments closely, and, of course, I think if you're going to make the greatest change in policing in Scotland for more than a generation, then an examination of the arguments, an attempt to build consensus, seems to me particularly important. The status quo is not an option. Kenny McCaskill laid out clearly the advantages and the disadvantages of other aspects. We will be working to achieve a solution in the best interests of Scotland, of frontline policing, which maintains democratic accountability and generates the consensus across society with which such a major change should be introduced.
Ian Gray.
But, Presiding Officer, this is daft stuff. When you have to make...
Order.
When you have to make the decisions, when you are First Minister, you can't afford to be on 2 or 3 sides of the same issue at the same time. You have to make your decision and stick with it, live with it. Not my words. That's what Alex Salmond told the newspapers at the weekend. Now, he's consulting on 3 options for the police. But last night on television, the Justice Secretary said we are now down to 2 options for the police, although perhaps one option is stronger than the other. So is it 3 options? Is it 2 options? Or is it 1 option? Presiding Officer, this is daft stuff. In fact, it's pathetic. When is the First Minister going to act like he says a First Minister should, make his decision and stick with it, live with it?
First Minister.
I'm delighted that Ian Gray has given me the opportunity to remind a wider audience of the reason for the quote on being on 2 or 3 sides of the same issue. It referred, of course, to the council tax and was about Ian Gray's, first of all, attack on the council tax phrase and said that the bills would have to rise under the Labour Party. And then, just a few days later, he said he was not anything against the council tax phrase. And a few days after that, he said that the council tax bills would have to go up, but perhaps be limited in how much they increased. I think Ian Gray is in a very poor position to talk about having 2 or 3 issues or sides of a single issue. He can't make his mind up on anything. On the police reform, it is absolutely vital that we gain a consensus across Scottish society. As Kenny McCaskill noted yesterday, Labour haven't even achieved a consensus within the Labour Party, as prominent Labour councillors were attacking the idea of a single police force. I really do benefit, if only as an educational experience, that the Labour Party take part in the consultation so that we can move together to get the best result for Scotland and Scottish policing.
Great.
Presiding Officer, I know what Councillor Eric Milligan thinks on this issue. I know what Tricia Marwick, MSP, thinks on this too. She's against a single police force as well. But I just don't know what the First Minister thinks. Last July, his spokesperson said, "We have no plans to move away from 8 forces." In October, the First Minister himself told the Daily Telegraph he was opposed to the creation of a single Scotland-wide operation. The same month, his spokesperson said there would be more than one force and less than 8. Last night, his Justice Secretary said the case for one force was the strongest. Isn't it the case that the First Minister hasn't even got a consensus with himself on this issue?
First Minister.
But as the arguments have been examined, then what has become clear is that the option of a single police force offers significant savings, which are essential given the mess the Labour Party made of the economy and therefore the pressure on public finance. You see, unlike the Labour Party, we stood in a manifesto commitment to have 1,000 extra police on the streets of Scotland and have delivered that commitment. Under the public spending pressures from the coalition government, we know that change is necessary to maintain frontline policing. As the issue is examined, the single police force offers a substantial opportunity for efficiencies which will help the front line. But there are questions of democratic accountability. These are serious questions. No doubt these are the questions which are in the mind of Councillor Eric Milligan when he opposes Ian Gray's plans. That is why the argument and examination has to be worked through. And if we are proposing the greatest change in policing in a generation, it really is sensible to examine the issues carefully, to come to the conclusions together, to carry a consensus in Scottish society so that Scotland's police force is the people's police force.
Ian Gray.
Well, I still don't know what the First Minister thinks. And yes, it is a serious issue, and that's why it demands leadership. We can all see how painful it is for the First Minister sitting on this fence. Dither, delay and dodging decisions. That's the First Minister's modus operandi, and he is a serial offender. Public sector reform, a commission to report after the election. Higher education, a Scottish solution after the election. Climate change targets, no action till after the election. Police, fire, a consultation until after the election. Has the First Minister just given up on governing at all?
First Minister.
Council tax freeze delivered in Scotland now. The ending of prescription charges being delivered in Scotland now. 1,000 extra police on the streets of Scotland being delivered in Scotland now.
Order.
An
Order.
administration which has maintained and kept 90% of its manifesto commitments, far and away above anything of the Labour Party. 84
Order.
out of 94.
Order.
An administration which is saying to people that in return for the wage restraint that is necessary to protect jobs in the public sector, we'll protect household budgets. An administration that doesn't have a leader who appears in front of a placard outside this Parliament saying no wage freeze, just days after he appeared on the radio saying one was essential. An administration that delivers for the people of Scotland. An administration that looks for consensus because consensus is important. And an administration which will be re-elected in